人って付き合ってるの？
なわけねえだろ。
ないよ。
Ah, there's nothing like watching a pointless ship sink. This week, we just opened on Yui making the food victim of the week, Oden, and no, I'm not referring to the father of the gods of Norse mythology, but rather a pot dish made of several more porous ingredients like tofu and fish cakes, often stewed in miso-based broth. It also has the amazing property to suddenly undo brainwashing subplots. God, we should have given some to Omani a lot sooner. But yeah, I've actually had it a few times, and I thought it was pretty good. Granted, I just made it with some all-in-one store-bought packs, so maybe the real stuff is even better. In fact, in place of hot dogs, you can actually find a bunch of traveling carts all over Japan that make some good business making the stuff. Though, really, its main source of popularity, especially amongst older gentlemen, is the fact that most carts come with what we really want after a hard day. Speaking of which, an old man stopped by who was... yeah, put two there. But yeah, Mata was there to pay his respects to his old friend Yui's grandmother, Yone, along with his grandson, Kosuke, who looked like an older version of the leader of the Pop Harikaze Sim Squad. Gee, I wonder what this kid's gonna do for much of the episode. Oh my goodness, just look at how little personality this girl has. Still, the old man couldn't have arrived at a better time, as Yui was trying to recreate her grandmother's oden recipe, which Mata actually had a hand in making, so of course she tried to ask him about it, but then he went into this pretentious little speech about how difficult making boiled food was. I mean, dude, even if she doesn't make it exactly the same, you can at least still tell her what the soup base was made of. Well, whatever. At least the next thing was somewhat engaging, as he asked Rosemary if he used someone named Ginger, who, yeah, not too surprisingly, because spices, turned out to be another cook fighter, and in fact, his master. And apparently, Mata, Yone, and Mrs. Shinada, judging by that sad expression, had met him 20 years earlier, and much like other residents of Cook Kingdom, nursed him back to health with some food. These were all things his disciple was unaware of, suggesting that maybe there was a bigger conspiracy going on here. Okay, some actual main plot developments. Well, I'm sure the remainder of this episode will use its time effectively to actually develop this into an interesting little Okay, I'm sorry, I can't even finish that. Of course this ended up going nowhere. Yeah, I'm sure it'll play into something later in the series, but for this episode at least, we're gonna focus on the grandson and his issues. Though, to be fair, Kosuke was very justified in his frustrations with his grandfather, as he had been pushing him into working at his family's restaurant when he grew up, even though he pretty obviously wanted to become a baseball player. Granted, he still hadn't told Mata about this, figuring that the old man would be instantly against it, and after telling Yui to keep this a secret, she obviously needed to encourage the boy to go talk to her grandfather, as they needed to work this out on their own, and... Our main heroine, everyone! A girl who doesn't give two craps about personal privacy. And not too surprisingly, when going by the episode title, he wasn't going to let Kosuke pursue his dreams. Well, okay, now Yui really should get these two to talk things out before things get even more erratic, or they could just play ball.
I'm sorry, what?
Yep, just kind of out of nowhere, they all decided to play a game of baseball, I guess to help Kosuke practice, even though, you know, there are more pressing issues they should deal with. But I guess they just really wanted to dress these girls up because that's all the show can do these days. Granted, at least for once, Yui remembered Takumi existed, but he also ended up playing part of this pointless little love triangle that thankfully ended after this scene. FYI, I'm counting this and a later narration at the end of the game as one. Both are explaining something kind of important, but it really should have been communicated by the characters, not the narrator. But yeah, after a rather pointlessly convoluted game, we return to the actually kind of interesting main plot of this episode, as Kosuke revealed something kind of troubling about his home life. Combine that with an actually good bit of Mata mourning the passing of his old friends Yone and Ginger, and this old man's issues start to become all too clear. He, much like his oden recipe, hadn't changed.
この場所でこのままでいることが大切なんだ。
Though, unlike Granny Tendo, who knew her grandson was still alive and was just waiting for him to return, this old man couldn't accept that his friends were gone, and thus was trying to keep everything almost the same, ignoring the wants and needs of his grandson. Thus, while he was being a terrible grandparent for trying to control every aspect of his grandson's life, including what he ate, it at least wasn't without reason, as he just couldn't complete the mourning process. Something that even Rosemary and Yui were kind of struggling with. This is actually really good stuff that they could even make a whole episode out of, but unfortunately, instead, they end up bringing up my biggest issue with the show. They have some interesting and legit good ideas, but they never go all the way with them. No, instead, not only is this the only scene where they really bring up the passing of their loved ones, but what's the solution to Mata being a controlling asshole?
切って気持ちを伝えてみたらどうかな。
俺じいちゃんに謝る。
You have nothing to apologize for. Whatever the reason, this old geezer has absolutely no right to regulate as much of your life as he has. And unless his issues are addressed, chances are good you're just gonna end up back at square one and eventually in the kitchen rather than the baseball field. I'm serious when I say this episode kind of triggers me because this is a terrible lesson to teach its core audience. If someone you know, especially a loved one, is having some clear issues, you should at least try to talk it out with them and not just bend to their will. And you wanna know what's the worst part of all of this? It could have been the basis for some good development for Rosemary and Yui. As I said, they were both still mourning over the loss of two people who we now know are incredibly important to the main plot of the show because of their connections to each other and Cook Kingdom. By learning what Ginger and Yone meant to them, we could get some good introspection to these characters. But other than a little bit at the end, this is pretty much all we're going to get, and even then, all we really learned about Yui was that she loved and respected her grandmother.
We won't say a word.
And instead, this episode just spent time on a pointless ball game because this is a season where everything has to be overly safe and not tackle deeper subjects like death, even though toy animation and this very franchise has tackled them incredibly well in the past. But not anymore, apparently. But yeah, no surprise, Sekiro struck without Spiritor or his kids by her side. Seriously, why are they even in the show at this point? And she made a monster out of some Oden trays. And to be fair, the fight was well animated in parts, with the monster effectively using some AoE attacks. Oh hey, it's what was your name again? Though in the end, only Yui really contributed to the fight, and while she does have justification by wanting to restore the food that connected her to her late grandmother, it still doesn't really expand on their relationship. And with that, the episode ended with Kosuke apologizing to his grandfather for wanting to live his life the way he wanted to, and I guess we got confirmation that Yoni was the narrator, even though it was painfully obvious. Ironically, this episode was a lot like a subpar bowl of Oden. Individually, some of it can be quite good, but unless properly cooked, you'll just end up with a mishmash of miscellaneous undercooked ingredients. And the whole dish can especially be brought down if unnecessary ingredients are just added in without purpose. This series is actually drawing close to its end, and yet it doesn't really feel that way when a lot of it is undercooked like this. I'll admit, maybe a lot of the frustrations I'm feeling right now has been boiling over the course of the series and its many shortcomings. Because while I still do think the moral they were trying to get across was delivered very poorly, I don't think it was a bad lesson on its own. Basically, respect your elders, especially since they might not have that much time left. The issue here, of course, is that there's a lot of extra baggage attached to this old man that has resulted in him heavily mistreating his grandson, and yet he's the one who has to apologize first. Moreover, there's some great story opportunities for both this individual episode and the series at large that are being ignored. Mourning the passing of a loved one is not something most people overcome easily, but it can go more smoothly if you have friends and family to talk to. And yet, ultimately, because the show doesn't want to tackle these deeper subjects whilst also just trying to tie it back to food, they just need to boil it down to Kosuke praising his grandfather's bar food. From there, they fill up time with a pointless ball game and a love triangle that will never go anywhere, especially with Yui. Speaking of whom, and in spite of some revelations that are very slowly tying everyone together, we still don't know that much more about her relationship with Yone or her as a character in general. All she's really done is parrot her grandmother's proverbs, often incorrectly, and has mostly been a reactionary and not proactive character, either exposing other people's secrets. Even Takumi, who I am glad to see again, was more proactive by talking to Mata himself. He couldn't salvage this broken Aesop, but at least he did something. But yeah, overall, other than some very slight developments and reveals, this at best was just another episode, and at worst was offensively bad. Again, maybe this stuff doesn't bother you as much as it does me, but if you couldn't tell, I'm just kind of checked out at this point. Next week, the show is going to go on break due to some sporting events, and while I clearly couldn't give less of a crap about physical activity, I do have to say, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this season has become a little bit of a chore to get through, especially during this run of mostly filler episodes. So much so that I have a few things to say about it, and may make a video to replace the review next week. Not making any promises, but if I can fill out 4 pages worth of script, we'll see. Regardless, look forward to it. Until next time though, farewell for now, my friends, and I don't need a boiled side dish to just enjoy this stuff on its own.